Greetings everyone, and welcome to part 2B of my video series titled Refuting Pro-Gay Theology. If you haven't seen the first two parts of my video, which is the introduction, and the second part of my video, which is part 2A concerning the social justice arguments, this is part 2 of my video series, still concerned on refuting the social justice arguments concerning the origins of homosexuality. If you haven't seen those first two videos, you can simply access those two videos by following these simple steps. To access the first two parts of my video series on debating pro-gay theology, just simply click on my username at the upper right hand side of my videos. This should take you directly to my YouTube channel. Once you have accessed my YouTube channel, just simply scroll down to the bottom of my YouTube channel until you find the icon displaying all of my videos. At the bottom row of the icon displaying my video, just simply click on either one or two of these videos. One which is the introduction of debating pro-gay theology, and the second one is the part 2A, secular arguments of debating pro-gay theology. So if you haven't seen this video, be sure to watch these two videos also. Judging from some of the comments that I have read on my video series, I have noticed that a lot of people are using the color of my skin to justify the wicked homosexual movement. There's a big difference between one's race and one's ancestry, racial ancestry, and ethnicity to one's sexual preference. Sexual preference is something that is chosen. One's race is not chosen. Homosexuality is a sin. One's race is not a sin. The Bible condemns homosexuality. The Bible does not condemn one's ethnicity or one's race. So the people commenting on my videos, please don't use discrimination against African Americans and persecution of African Americans and African American civil rights to justify the evil satanistic homosexual movement. This is completely illogical. This is a complete deception. Okay, moving on. This video is going to be continuing from part 2A, which is debating pro-gay theology. We're going to be talking about the origins of homosexuality. From my previous video, we know that homosexuality cannot be caused by a hormonal deficiency in the prenatal hormones of the mother's womb. Homosexuality must be contribution to something similar, such as in the environment, or maybe the environment or genes, which I would definitely prove that homosexuality is not genetic. So it must be something else. So we will discuss it in this video. Social justice argument number 1. Homosexuality is inborn. Argument number 1A. Simon LeVay and the hypothalamus. In the year 1991 AD, Dr. LeVay, a neuroscientist at the Salk Institute of La Jolla, California, examined the brains of 41 cadavers. These cadavers included 19 allegedly homosexual men, 16 allegedly heterosexual men, and 6 allegedly heterosexual women. His study focused on the group of neurons in the hypothalamus structure called the intestinal nuclei of the anterior hypothalamus, or the INAA3. He reported this region of the brain to be larger in heterosexual men than in homosexuals. Likewise, he found it to be larger in heterosexual men than in the women he studied. For that reason, he postulated homosexuality to be inborn, the result of size variations in the INAA3, and his findings were published in Science in August of the year 1991. This is the study most often quoted when people insist that homosexuality has been proven to be inborn. Here is my response. This argument is exaggerated and misleading for 6 important reasons. First, LeVay did not prove homosexuality to be inborn. His results were not uniformly consistent. On the surface, it appears that all of LeVay's homosexual subjects had smaller INAA3s than his heterosexual ones. In fact, 3 of the homosexual subjects actually had larger INAA3s than the heterosexuals. Additionally, 3 of the heterosexual subjects had smaller INAA3s than the average homosexual subject. Thus, 6 of LeVay's 35 male subjects, which accounted for 17% of his total study group, contradicted his own theory. Second, LeVay did not necessarily measure the INAA3 properly. The area LeVay was measuring is quite smaller than snowflakes, according to scientists interviewed when his study was released. His peers in the neuroscientific community cannot agree on whether the INAA3 should be measured by its size, volume, or by its number of neurons. Third, it's unclear whether brain structure affects behavior or behavior affects brain structure. Dr. Kenneth Clevingston, also of Salk Institute, points out that neurons can change in response to experience. You could postulate, he says, that brain change occurs throughout life as a consequence of experience. In other words, even if there is a significant difference between the brain structure of heterosexual and homosexual men, it is unclear whether the brain structure caused their homosexuality or if their homosexuality affected their brain structure. In fact, 1 year after LaVey's study was released, Dr. Louis Baker of UCLA obtained evidence that behavioral therapy can produce changes in brain circuitry, reinforcing the idea that behavior can and does affect one's brain structure. Therefore, even if differences do exist between INAH3s of homosexual and heterosexual men, it is possible that the diminished size of homosexuals is caused by his behavior rather than his behavior being caused by the INAH3 size. Fourth, LaVey was not certain which of his subjects were homosexual and which were heterosexual. Dr. LaVey admits this represents a distinct shortcoming in his study, having only case histories on his subjects to go by, which were by no means guaranteed to provide accurate information about the patient's sexual orientation. He could only assume that if a patient's record did not indicate he was gay, he must have been heterosexual. Yet 6 of the 16 reportedly heterosexual men studied had died of AIDS, increasing the chances that sexual histories may have been incompletely recorded. If it is uncertain which of LaVey's subjects were heterosexual and which were homosexual, how useful can his conclusions about differences between them really be? Fifth, LaVey did not approach the subject objectively. Dr. LaVey, who was openly homosexual, told Newsweek that after the death of his lover, he was designed to find a genetic cause of homosexuality or he would abandon science altogether. Furthermore, he admitted he hoped to educate society about homosexuality, affecting legal and religious attitudes towards it, none of which diminishes his credentials as a neuroscientist, but his research can hardly be said to have been unbiased. Sixth, the scientific community did not by any means unanimously accept Dr. LaVey's study. Comments from other scientists in response to LaVey's work are noteworthy. Dr. Richard Nakaruma of the National Institute of Mental Health says it would take a larger effort to be convinced there is a link between this structure and homosexuality. Dr. Ann Fasco Sterling of Brown University is less gentle in her response. She says, and I quote, "My freshman biology students know enough to sink this study," unquote. Dr. Rochelle Klinger, a psychiatrist at Medical College of Virginia, doubts we will ever find a single cause for homosexuality. And Scientific American sums up the reason many professionals approach the INAH3 theory with caution. LaVey's study has yet to be fully replicated by another researcher. Argument 1B. Twins. In the year 1991, psychologist Michael Bailey of Northwestern University, a gay rights activist, and psychiatrist Richard Pillard of Boston University School of Medicine, who was openly homosexual as well as the majority of researchers who conduct this research, compared sets of identical male twins to fraternal twins, whose genetic ties are less close. In each set, at least one twin was homosexual. They found that among the identical twins, 52% were both homosexual as opposed to the fraternal twins, among whom only 22% shared a homosexual orientation. Pillard and Bailey suggested the higher incidence of shared homosexuality among identical twins meant homosexuality was genetic in origin. To this day, the researchers and gay rights activists continue to believe homosexuality is genetic based on this research, although they have no empirical evidence to justify their assumptions. Here's my response. This argument is misleading and exaggerated for 4 main reasons. First, Pillard and Bailey's findings actually indicate that something besides genes must account for homosexuality. If 48% of identical twins who are closely linked genetically do not share the same sexual orientation, then genetics alone cannot account for homosexuality. Bailey admitted as much as by stating, there must be something in the environment to yield the discordant twins. Second, all of twins Pillard and Bailey studied were raised in the same household. If the set of twins in which both brothers were homosexual were raised in separate homes, it might be much easier to believe genes played a role in their sexual development. But since they were all raised in the same households, it's impossible to know what effect environment played and what effect, if any, genes played. Dr. Fasto Sterling summarized the problem. In order for such a study to be at all meaningful, you would have to look at twins raised apart.
Third, Drs. Pillard and Bailey, like Dr. LeVay, did not approach the subject objectively. Their personal feelings about homosexuality, like Dr. LeVay, certainly do not disqualify them from doing good research on the subject, but they must be at the very least considered. Pillard said, in fact, a genetic component in sexual orientation said this is not a fault, and both he and Bailey stated they hoped their work would disprove homophobic claims. Fourth, a later study on twins yielded results different from Pillard and Bailey's. In March of 1992, the British Journal of Psychiatry published a report on homosexuals who are twins, both fraternal and identical, and found that only 20% of the homosexual twins had a gay co-twin, leading the researchers to conclude that genetic factors are insufficient explanation of the development of sexual orientation. Not only then has Pillard and Bailey's work not been replicated, when a similar study was conducted, it had completely different results.
The twin studies conducted on homosexuality do not prove that homosexuality is an innate characteristic. It actually shows a correlation between homosexuality, genetics, and the environment. So in my next video, we'll discuss more on the twin studies, and we'll talk about the relationship between homosexuality and genetics, if a relationship actually exists between the two. So I thank you all for tuning into the video. Be sure to check out my next video. May heaven smile upon you all. May God bless you all. Amen.